Have you any specific evidence or indication at the moment as to whether people from EU 27 countries are increasingly reluctant to come to the UK because they're uncertain of their continuing rights and regime? And that can be both at the executive level or, as it were, at the working level. And perhaps others would like to join in on that one as well.
Well, if I was, I mean, categorically, yes. It's a combination of factors. I mean, the exchange, let's be honest, exchange rate plays quite a big role, particularly at the non-graduate end. We don't like to talk about unskilled, actually, because everyone has skills. But at the non-graduate end of the market, the potential to send money home is hugely important. There is something very important about the fact that we have not been clear about rights during the transition. That is getting clearer, but even in the event of no deal, that is still not clear. And so we are hearing from members all across the country that they are, I mean, I was with a yogurt manufacturer in Somerset who has been employing almost entirely fantastic Romanian and Polish workers, and he can't, they went home after the summer and they didn't come back. At the high end, Catherine will be able to talk to that, I think, very, very clearly. But it's just become that much harder when people have the choice of London or Paris or New York or Tokyo. It's become that much harder. So again, it's a present challenge in the here and now.
Absolutely, that is what we're hearing, and I can't give you precise figures, but I can say that I have spoken to recruitment consultants who tell me that this is what they're experiencing, but also hearing from our businesses that it's not just, in fact, EU workers, because others are also feeling somewhat unwelcome, but the people who might previously have wanted to make their lives here are, when they're thinking of lifetime decisions, are applying for jobs elsewhere, are either not applying to come here in the same numbers that they were, or applying for moves elsewhere. And we're hearing this not just from the banks, and in some ways, I mean, you can always get somebody to come for a couple of years because London is such an exciting place and work here, but the pressures are for people who might stay here for longer. But what is also very worrying is that we're hearing it from the tech sector, that the entrepreneurs are becoming very concerned and are not coming or are not staying, and indeed are experiencing, I mentioned earlier, the problems with having to apply for visas or whatever, if that process is difficult. We're also hearing that very clearly, that people are getting very fed up with that and then ringing home and saying, you know, I thought it was great coming to London, actually it's such a bore getting the visa. So we're hearing from a number of different sources concerns that people are less keen to come and stay here and work here.
I'd be happy to put in a supplementary note, but there are hard examples, particularly in our public services, and we're seeing the stress that they're suffering as a result. We know that the number of EU citizens as nurses registering has dropped significantly, midwives too, I believe, but we can provide more information. But I would also add to that we're also getting information from our unions, you know, on a regular basis of incidents where EU citizens, particularly in public-facing roles, for example, on the railways, being asked, when are you going to go home? Thinking, do they mean when am I knocking off? Actually, they mean when are you going home? And I would also just add, I think some of the publicity around what's happened to the Windrush generation does not help in terms of sending out a message about whether Britain is welcoming to migrants from any quarter. You know, and I think we need to take it very seriously. I don't know whether we're going back to that question on the Mansion House.
If you and Catherine are beginning to say a little bit more about what greater clarity you, we could hope for from the government.
I mean, again, I don't want to simplify this too much, but in the interest of brevity, it seems to me very clear that the EC's guidelines are very clear, that if you rule out single market and customs union membership, what you're left with is Canada, no pluses. It seems to me that the Prime Minister made a big again as a negotiator, made a strategic mistake. It's fine having red lines, but you don't publish them. You give yourself some room for manoeuvre. You don't tie yourself up so early on in the process. And I think what I would like to hear is some clarity about what the real priorities are for the people of this country. And clearly we're arguing those priorities, the bottom line should be jobs and rights. That's what matters to people. Politically, clearly the Prime Minister has a challenge. I think she has to reach over the heads of her hardliners in her own cabinet and appeal to the country, because I think the country needs to be prepared for those pragmatic trades and compromises that will need to be made. And finally, I would say that she needs to be clear about tackling the root causes of people's concerns.
What model? I wonder whether we've had a lot of this discussion, an hour and 15 minutes or so, looking back at, you know, what happened and a lot of where we are. But what do you really think will come out at the end of this? I know it's a bit of a looking into crystal ball. We're all confused. We were just saying earlier before you came in. I don't think confusion is a rare trait at the moment. But what do you think likely outcomes of the negotiations will be on our relationship, the EU and the UK? And what do you think we'll get? First of all, do you think we'll get a trade deal? And what kind of trade deal? What will it look like?
Well, as they say, every day is a new adventure, and it's not always easy to predict. I'm conscious, and it was important from our perspective, that Monsieur Barnier left the single market on the table, and that will stay on the table for the transition. We'd encourage the government at least to explore it in some depth, but we probably our best guess will be that we'll end up with some kind of free trade agreement. We then quickly move into the question, how long is all that going to take? So, you know, if CETA is a benchmark, then that was 5-6 years, 7 years before that was signed off. And similarly, as I mentioned before, some of the other proposals around so-called smart borders, even if you take it at face value, again, we could be talking 5-6 years. How much will it cost? Who will do it? Capita. Some of the other major outsourcers not looking very stable at the moment. So it doesn't, I have to say, look rosy from our perspective, and there are big questions about how well prepared this country is. We've got an industrial strategy. I'm not sure our members are feeling it much at the moment.
Well, I wonder whether you could also add in whether you see any opportunities. I think we've all heard about the drawbacks, but do you see any opportunities coming out of this?
Well,
in the future?
It's difficult when the government's own impact assessment has said we're going to be hit, we're going to lose out, it is going to cost us and cost the economy. So, you know, on a range from 8% drop to a 2% drop, even if we got Norway, you know, there are real consequences for people's jobs and livelihoods. And of course, even if we got the customs union, that doesn't deal with the 80% of the economy in services. And a lot of jobs dependent on trade in services with the EU, and actually relatively little attention in all the discussion about the customs union. I'm a bit worried that we're forgetting about where the bulk of our economy lies and what that means for jobs.
We haven't been able to identify specific opportunities coming out of Brexit, and I've had cross-sectoral meetings with people from other sectors have said the same. But over the last few months I have detected a new mood of, I think we've been galvanised, a new mood of we get up and do, really. We must examine what our fundamentals are and what best we can do with them. Exactly.
We had a rather interesting evidence session last week where an economist from Cambridge came, Dr. Meredith Crowley, and she gave evidence to us, you know, that in fact the future is inevitably going to mean being in trading blocks, and that you know, leaving Europe, and then freewheeling off, you know, Europe making Britain, you know, befriending the world. she said we're going to end up actually having to look at whether it isn't better for us at that stage becoming part of another bloc, and you'd end up with, you know, looking at the Pacific, you know, the trade Pacific, you know, the trading bloc in the Pacific, you know, with Australia and New Zealand and so on, in order to head off China, or in fact the Mexican-Canadian thing with the United States, that you end up, because the future is in being in a bloc. The nature of the globalised world is going on your own when you're a wee place like the UK is not going to work for us in the big wide world. What do you make of that?
I have to say we would agree with a lot of that. I mean, the economics of it are very compelling, that bilateral trade deals are less advantageous than multilateral trade deals. And our members say the same thing, actually. The power of being part of a bloc and going to negotiate, for example, in India or in China, is more powerful. So there is something in that. But then I think we need to look at the arithmetic.
It's
here.
like collective bargaining, I'm sure Miss O'Grady would say.
But then let's just look at the numbers there, because the total TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, accounts for 8% of our trade now. If we join that, we are joining, you know, a smaller club than we're part of now. So these numbers really matter, and I have to say I would agree with that analysis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Francis, you got a comment on that?
Just to add, of course, we're in a global economy. You combine to boost your bargaining power. This was part of the TUC's assessment in looking at where our best options lie. The question for us is that the single market, the EU single market, is the only bloc that provides a voice for working people and a level of protection for working people that we think is worth having. No other bloc does that. That's the difference. We're going to have to play by somebody's rules. It's just whose rules.
Thank you.